I'm your host, Sabby. I'm your host, Sabby. All right, guys, welcome. Happy Friday. We made it to the end of the week. I have a special guest with me tonight. We're going to get into this whole debt ceiling issue. We're going to talk about the strikes that are going on across the country. So everyone, please give a huge welcome to Steve Grumbine. Hey, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for coming back. For those of you who are new, Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of the Fred Hampton Leftist Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Roundtable and Friday for the Sabby Sabs show. So let me go ahead and share my screen because I want to show you guys what we're going to talk about tonight, because I saw this morning when I got up and I thought, oh, this can easily be portrayed as a good thing for some people. And the reason why I wanted to bring Steve on is Steve knows a lot about MMT. For some of you, this may be a new thing, but let me go ahead and share my screen. Let me go back to that folder. Okay. All right, here we go. So here's what we're talking about tonight, ladies and gentlemen. So Biden raises the debt ceiling. He signed on that apparently last night. And we're going to talk about what MMT says about the debt ceiling. So this is going to be important. And a general strike is on the way. We're going to talk about the strikes that are going on across the country. I'm sure some of you have heard about them. Kellogg's, Kaiser Permanente, John Deere, to name a few. And I'm sure more and more will come as well. So let me pop out. And I'm going to start with this article. So this is from The Hill. And I think they were the first ones I saw to talk about this. So let's go ahead and get into it. So it says, I'm a little big here. All right, there we go. Biden signs bill to raise the debt ceiling. So let's go ahead and go through this a little bit. President Biden on Thursday signed a bill raising the debt ceiling, averting a default for at least another month. Only a month, guys. Pay attention to this. The House interrupted its scheduled recess and voted earlier in the day to raise the debt limit into December, when lawmakers will again have to raise the ceiling to avoid catastrophic economic consequences. So again, this is not a long-term solution. Biden administration officials had warned the nation would default if the debt limit was not raised by October 18, potentially pushing the economy back into a recession after months of steady gains amid the coronavirus pandemic. The House previously passed legislation twice in the last few weeks to suspend the debt limit into December 2022, first as part of a government funding bill and later as a standalone measure. The Senate last week passed a short-term debt ceiling extension in a party line 50-48 vote, though 11 Republicans joined the Democrats to get the required 60 votes to overcome the legislative filibuster. Let me go down here. After the vote, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell vowed the GOP would not assist Democrats with raising the debt ceiling further when it has to be done again in December. So remember that. Hold on to that. The pledge will likely force Democrats to contend with the possibility of raising it through budget reconciliation, something some members of the party have been reluctant to do. I'm going to pop out. All right. So, Steve, please explain to everyone what MMT says about this so-called debt ceiling.
So the debt ceiling is an arbitrary number that Congress has put to itself. It's a legislative rule. It's not like some law or anything like that. This is a legislative rule. They put this in place as a means of providing a wedge, if you will, that they can use no matter what. And the reason why the Democrats, for example, aren't fighting this harder in different ways and more ruthless ways, if you will, it's because they want to hold on to the right to use it later, too. Okay. Because the only way to stop certain things from happening is to have these little, you know, fake rules in the background that they can use to pull out to kind of use as a hedge against the other party's desires. And the debt limit really is talking about money that has already been spent, if you will, or at least promised to be spent or appropriated by Congress. And this is the ability to actually pay the bill that they've agreed to spend the money on. And so it's kind of like imagine a hostage scenario of one person where the one person grabs himself around the throat, puts a gun to their own head and says, "Hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill the guy." And that's in essence, that's the clown car we're dealing with here. It really is a joke. And so MMT would tell you that the debt limit is irrelevant. It's a joke. There's not some fundamental important thing here. Ultimately, it should be completely gotten rid of. Now, there is a gimmick out there, and it is an accounting gimmick. It's like, let's just show you how absolutely absurd your debt limit idea is. And that's called mint the coin. And this has been going on for a very, very long time, where they talk about depositing a $1 trillion coin, creating some random coin out of nowhere denominated at 1 trillion, or maybe two of them, or three of them, or five of them. It doesn't really matter. And depositing that at the Fed and saying, all of our stuff will go through now, right? Because there's this like fake little game between the Treasury and the Fed. And in other words, the Treasury can only borrow so much money from the Fed, but the Fed is part of the government. So this is all an accounting gimmick. And I know people want to say the Fed is something more than that, and that, whatever. It's not. I mean, you save yourself a lot of brain cells not trying to go down the rabbit hole on the Fed. But regardless of this is a game that they're playing, and MMT would tell you that it's a joke. MMT would tell you that it is irrelevant, that it has no real meaningful anything. And so what they'll do is they'll continue to raise this debt limit because the Constitution says we have to pay our bills. So ultimately, it would be a constitutional violation if somebody were to withhold that money, to politically withhold the ability to pay our bills. And so it really is just a joke. And so Mitch McConnell and gang are planning right around the December timeframe to once again bring this whole back. And it will be the exact same volleyball game that we've got going on before they extended it. And it'll be the same one that's always happened. You notice nothing's ever happened to our nation based on quote unquote national debt. This isn't talking about national debt either. This is really talking about money that was budgeted at the beginning of the year and us spending more, because you can't really gauge, just so we're on the same page. There's tons of what we call automatic stabilizers that are in the economy, unemployment benefits, whatever, all sorts of trigger type programs that funnel money into the economy to ensure that it doesn't bottom out. And so there's no way to control an automatic stabilizer. And so what happens is that by the end of the year or sometime, we get to that debt limit, okay? Because things go up. And naturally, with the pandemic, we went up. I don't think anybody could predict how many automatic stabilizers would be leveraged during this time. I don't think anybody could determine a lot of things. So budgets are oftentimes, when they're dollar figure budgets, are pretty stupid too, because you're creating that money. It's not like you've got to gather it from taxpayers. You're creating the money for that budget every time Congress spends. So ultimately, the debt limit is just a joke. It's just a political tool used to, bribe, if you will, legally bribe the other party to do their bidding. And it's a joke. So that's the MMT angle.
Oh my gosh. So when you think about the fact that, Biden just signed this bill, basically that doesn't really mean anything.
Well, it buys us a month of brinksmanship. Okay. But in fairness, here's what could happen. I mean, yesterday, literally, Biden and the gang could literally, Yellen, could literally mint that coin, deposit it, and this be over for like forever, right? Until we get even higher debt, right? Um, but it's a very real thing that the Republicans, or if it were reversed, the Democrats could literally do this brinksmanship and try to force a default. Now, there are some legal precedents there. I imagine the Supreme Court would jump in and force them to pay their bills because the constitutional law would say they have to pay their bills.
Hmm.
But it's very real in the sense that it's like if you believe that standing on one foot and patting your head will change the course of history. Doesn't matter whether it will or will not. If you believe that and you do that every time, then it's got the same effect of it being real. And with the Congress, they act like this is real, and so they behave like it is real, and therefore they can make it real, if you will. It's almost like cosplaying a disaster, but it's a disaster they're creating.
So what happens if the debt, whatever, continues to like increase? What would happen to the country? Like, in other words, like, why can't the US government just print more money?
Well, that's all we're talking about here. Money is debt. Okay, so the U.S. dollar in and of itself amounts to $1 of U.S. debt, and this goes back to MMT 101, understanding that the dollar is nothing more than a tax credit. Okay, so if you think about this, every time the government spends a dollar into the economy, it puts a tally on one side of the ledger. That's the debt side. On the asset side is the dollar on the private side, which is us, you and me. When you get a dollar, that's a dollar that's on the plus side, the asset side. So when you think about what the national debt and all that stuff is to begin with, it's kind of a joke. It's just an accounting identity, right? Assets and liabilities. And they're creating it out of thin air. So it's just all very silly. But what if the national debt keeps going up? Nothing, absolutely nothing. The debt is a result of spending new money. That's what the debt comes. We don't borrow our own currency. That's the most important thing for people to realize. We literally do not borrow our own currency. We have a legal rule in place that we say that, hey, we have to sell bonds when we spend money. Now, people think they're selling bonds to raise money to pay for things, but it's not that way at all. Whenever Congress spends money, they in turn go ahead and sell treasuries. They already buy these things with existing US dollars. It's like a savings account at the Fed and nothing more. And so this whole idea of the US borrowing money from people is a joke. Can you imagine? Just say it out loud with me. We went to China and we borrowed US dollars. I want you to think about that for a minute. Just how absolutely ludicrous it sounds. To say almost all of these economic things is to make yourself laugh because it's so stupid on its face. But most of us don't have any perspective of what's really happening. So it's like, oh my God, it's got to be really scary, right? Debt. I
Mhm.
just looked at my bank account and it's negative. That's scary. They're going to take my house. That's debt. That's scary, right?
Mhm.
That's not the same thing with the US government at all. It literally creates the money every time Congress appropriates it and spends it into existence.
Wow. It's just like I like this. Oh my gosh. Like it really just blows my mind that like more people don't know about this.
Well, I want you to think about something else too, right? Take the debt and the debt limit over here for just a second. Think about the fact that people are running around talking about getting reparations. So reparations is a hot button issue, even if politicians aren't necessarily talking about it. We are talking about it, right? A lot of us are talking about it. And what do you think is one of the primary things that stands in the way of reparations? How are you going to pay for it, man? You
Yeah.
know, Sandy Darity, good friend, great author, brilliant scholar, wrote the book From Here to Equality. In
Mhm.
that book, he breaks down step by step by step the amount of monies due ADOS people that are currently alive today that would receive reparations as people who are descendants of slaves. In that, he comes up with a number, roughly $800,000 per ADOS. That's a lot of cheddar, right? $800,000. Now, it ain't a lot, in the sense of what has been taken and stolen from people to begin with.
Mhm.
It's a lot when you just think about the money. If you're just thinking about money based on what you and I know of our own bank account, can you imagine getting a check for $800,000 saying, thank you very much, right? You could do a lot of stuff with $800,000, right?
Yep.
But if you're out there thinking that the United States is broke, you're out there cheering on China to get rid of the US dollar, they're going to kill the dollar, blah, blah. And you're out there cheering that on. That's your reparations right there that they're cheering the crash of the dollar on, whether they realize it or not. That's all and the reason is they don't understand that it's not their tax dollar that would be paying for reparations. But just imagine if that were to go into effect today. Let's say today they signed a bill, ADOS, they had all the check boxes down for all the people that would get these payments.
Mhm.
They make those payments. That would be a huge amount of debt that we'd have to borrow from China, right? Think about it. Think about how stupid that sounds right up there. We're not borrowing US dollars to pay for reparations from China either, right? And
Right.
so ultimately, anything that says we can't afford reparations is based in the same faulty logic that they're using for the debt ceiling. It's based on the same faulty logic. It's okay to admit what I'm about to say. I used to say this. I don't anymore. And I scold anyone that does. But when they talk about my hard-earned tax dollars pay for XYZ, or they blew all my hard-earned tax dollars on Trump's golf trips, or they blew all my hard-earned tax dollars on bombs and stuff like that. Well, that's the thing. They use that mindset that it's your hard-earned tax dollar doing it. Because ultimately, if they can breed a scarcity mindset in your head, and you think like you're tight, my God, they're taking more tax money from me, and I don't even have any bananas in the kitchen. I don't even have any cheese in the fridge. I don't even have any milk. I mean, I'm going to be pretty pissed, right? So this keeps us from asking for more. But when you realize that not a single redneck from down south is paying a hard-earned tax dollar for reparations, once you realize that, then you realize that that same exact scenario where that hardened redneck that doesn't want to pay for reparations, it's the same thing with every other program from Medicare for All to a Green New Deal, you name it. Student loans, all that, the same exact deal. So almost everything we watch on TV, we should play drinking games or pot smoking games or some sort of games where every time they say one of these stupid things, that we like take a hit or take a drink or whatever, because it would be the most wild party of all time. We would be smashed before 15 minutes into the debate even. Watch the presidential debates, do the same thing, get sloshed on them, say economically illiterate things. And it just makes for great theater, if you will. But it's up to us, you, me, and the rest of the gang, to start getting a hold of this so that we can help those other folks, especially those people out there striking and folks that are hurting. Instead of holding up life-saving legislation based on how you're going to pay for it, let's just pay for it. Let's just do it, man. Let's just do some great things regardless of the wealthy people in this world. Let's render them irrelevant, right? And I think that right there, if you start talking to people and start getting them to see the foolishness of this debt limit, the lie behind it, the lie behind the hard-earned tax dollar. And let me just say this too, that hard-earned tax dollar mindset, that came from two people that are absolutely anti-progressives. That came from Margaret Thatcher and it came from Ronald Reagan. And yet you hear lefties talking about my hard-earned tax dollars like they're channeling their inner Reagan. And it kills me every time they do it. And I hope you all hear this and get embarrassed and don't do no more Ronald Reagan stuff anymore. Just let the whole idea of your hard-earned tax dollar drift away. The U.S. government, it's a new dollar every single time. So I mean, I look at this and I just think it's hilarious. It's not hilarious because unfortunately I'm not one of the wealthy people. So when shit hits the fan, it hits me too. You know what I mean? I don't go
Mhm.
unscathed. And I was telling you offline that things had gotten really hard for me, and just all the financial stuff, all these things
Yeah.
are coming to a head for a lot of people. It ain't just me. And so this debt ceiling conversation, it's taking away the perspective and the focus on all the things that aren't getting done, or that need to get done to make
Mhm.
people just survive. We're not even talking about thrive. We're talking about just survive. And
Yep.
it's political theater at its best. That's, I mean, for real. Like, whenever you hear this stuff, just think they're lying to me. End of story.
How does UBI fit into all of this? Because I'm not 100% sure how I feel about UBI. I've seen pros and cons about it, but in reference to MMT, where does UBI fit?
It doesn't. Um, so, I started out as a UBI guy. I thought it was really cool and stuff like that. It was a long time ago, though. Okay. Um, I've realized that the very things that most people worry about and whine about in economics are inflation and things like that, right? UBI represents a cash payout to everyone, regardless of who they are, regardless of their standing. And it's usually a subsistence wage, right? So Yang proposed $1,000 a month, but you have to give up Social Security and all these other things. Okay.
Mhm.
And even if you paid somebody 2,000 a month, this is ultimately a right wing program brought up by none other than the king neoliberal himself, which is Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman believed that, hey, the only problem with capitalism is we need more capitalism. And so the best way to have more capitalism, let's go ahead and give the people money so that they can be consumption units. Okay. It fundamentally changes nothing, because as you have seen with the pandemic, there were a lot of cash payments, not nearly enough cash payments to make people whole,
Right.
but there was a lot of cash payments. And there was a lot of cash payments that came without a lot of production to back the payments up. So, in other words, there wasn't the goods and services out there that people desperately want. So you're seeing inflation go up all over the place, right? A
Mhm.
lot of that is supply chain driven. A lot of that is driven on hoarding and gouging, price gouging,
Yep.
monopoly, and very, very monopolist kind of behavior. And ultimately, all a UBI does is allow those businesses and stuff to make money, to continue to make money. It doesn't fundamentally change the shithole of a country we live in. It doesn't change the job standards. It doesn't change our lives really at all, because ultimately there's no price anchor. Okay. So if I give you $1,000, but I say, hey, this thing that you need, it's 1,001. Well, now
Mhm.
you got to go get a job and subsidize that, right? And worse, companies like Walmart and others will use a UBI to subsidize bad wages. Okay. This is not something where it's like, okay, you must pay everyone, you must keep all the programs in place. No, the right wing has been working tirelessly while we went out and partied and did whatever we did. They were studious and went out there and figured out how they could kick our asses. And they've been very, very good at it. And for probably 50 years, they've been working on getting all their governorships and local and state municipalities, coupled with tons and tons and tons of judges. They have been taking the long approach to this. And they have been begging for a constitutional convention so they could do a number of things that none of us would really like. Number one being a balanced budget amendment, okay, et cetera. And so these folks have also a great desire, especially the libertarian, the right wing libertarian strain has a great desire for a UBI as well. Now, unfortunately, there's a red brown mix that has occurred where libertarians have started straying into the left, and they've been putting those kind of thoughts out there. And if you don't have a firm grasp on economics and understand that, without the production to back a UBI, it becomes very inflationary. Okay. It's not something that has that productive push. And with that in mind, the right wing is like just sitting there licking their chops, because their goal is to eliminate any vestige of the New Deal, any of the Great Society. They want to get rid of government in general. They think government, period, is the problem. When
Mm.
government is really captured right now, and you and I are government, even though we're not in there elected, we're government. The government is supposed to be we the people. And so by making the government feckless, by making it useless and worthless, they create this scenario where, of course, you want big business to be your God. Of course, you want just money, because big business will take care of you, because everything the government touches turns to shit, don't you know? Okay. And so it's this logic here that if I just give people money, it'll solve their problems. Now, imagine how hard it is. And you're an educated woman working in a great job in a great city, and you know how hard it is to find the best deals. Even as somebody who is plugged in to the machine, you know how to shop, you know where to find things. But if you've been living under a bridge or in a trailer and don't have internet and haven't gotten a degree and don't have family that taught you how to invest and taught you how to spend and taught you how to find the best deals, etc., when you give that poor person $1,000, the first thing they're going to do is just spend it. They're going to spend it on whatever they can, because they have so many needs that have been building up over the years. Teeth rotting out of their mouth, freaking health bill, all kinds of stuff, right? We're not just talking about they might go out and buy a toy. I mean, we're talking about people that are literally on their last legs. And what does the UBI do? It gives them a subsistence wage and says, now go pay for everything yourself. You go do this yourself, Mr. Poor Person. And to me, the appropriate use of the public purpose and the federal government is to, in fact, take the Constitution at its word and provide for the general welfare of the people. Okay.
Mm.
And so a UBI gives you cash. But what do you do with cash? You buy things that you need. So my belief is, and I think most MMTers believe, in a universal basic services contract, because it doesn't matter how high you raise the price of whatever the government is providing you, the government will absorb that cost. You, however, will have the thing you wanted, whether it be shelter, whether it be food, whether it be clothing, whether it be transportation, whether it be college, whatever. You will have those things, those tangible assets in your hands. You're not going to be sitting there wondering if your $1,000 covers the things that you should be having taken care of for you. And so as a leftist, I'm looking for the big G, the big government, to provide those services for us. Right now, when I say provide it, I'm talking about as the payer.
Mm-hmm.
We have all kinds of businesses out there that should get that first check from the government, but instead, because we don't have anti-corruption laws on the books and stuff like that, this money ends up going to their favorite people. Now, yes, there is a FAR, the Federal Acquisition Act and stuff, that they go through to make sure that they're getting at least 3 bids for things. But Lockheed, Boeing, all those folks, they know how to get in the door. Halliburton, you name it. But if we're spending on the people, we would have the ability for them, me and you, to be able to go live our lives without worrying about medical debt, without worrying about college debt, without worrying about where we're getting our next meal, and so forth. In my opinion, there's no reason for a UBI. We could give people universal basic services to ensure that they are not the ones left holding the bag for price increases. Now, on the flip side, one of the things I think that is really important to understand is, in fact, that the UBI sounds good. And so it's not, something that I would get angry at lefties for not knowing better. But if you pull back and you ask yourself, what have you done by giving people a UBI? What you've done is kept the system exactly as it is. And you've said, here's some cash, go play. Go forage for yourself, figure it out. And that is a libertarian-minded belief system, one that I do not subscribe to. I'm very much a collectivist, very much a team us, all of us working together kind of guy. I am not in any way, shape, or form thinking that it's great to see poor people pull themselves up by their bootstraps or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of the thinking behind the UBI is self-sufficiency. I want to do this. I can do that. I will do this. The problem is that you're one person. What about the other 50 people that will be left in the trash, basically, the heat that just forgotten about as they can't afford to live. And I think that this right here, it's just one of those fundamental issues of understanding that without a price anchor and without a payment significant enough that a person doesn't have to work to subsidize their income, a UBI is a false promise. And because it will be used to subsidize poor wages. And you go back to reparations as an example so you can show you the dichotomy. I was having this argument earlier with someone, and I said, reparations are not a UBI. Reparations are you're owed. These are owed
Yeah. It's a
payments.
debt that's owed. Yep.
That's right. This is not a UBI. This is a debt now the other thing is that if I give you $800,000, like Sandy Darity's plan asks for, well, I could pay off my house, my car, my everything, and be debt free instantly. What a life. I don't even know how to live a life without being in debt. Can you imagine the freedom of truly not being in debt anymore?
Mm-hmm.
I can't. I want to, but I can't. And that to me is a very different story, because you're not just giving somebody some money that's just barely enough to that they pay their landlord gets a little bit of chatter, but they don't have anything to survive on. And so to me, when I see that 800,000 that they talk about for reparations, I think to myself, that's going to help an awful lot of people way beyond the Atos community. It's going to be including myself. When all of a sudden people are willing to buy things, they're going out and doing things, they're creating new businesses, they're bringing me in. That's an opportunity for everyone to do well, right? When all they say lift the ships, lift them all up, man. We got to lift them all up, and I think that reparations does that. It's a huge drag on society to have people like homeless and freaking sick and feeling like shit. And you look at the prison, school to prison pipeline, and you look at all those poor kids that are going to school on grape drank and freaking Snickers bars, and not even Snickers, because that has protein in it. I mean, just garbage food, right? And you think to yourself, it's no wonder. And the system keeps perpetuating itself. And I think a UBI ultimately gives a false sense of we've accomplished something while simultaneously keeping all the negatives in place, just for them to raise prices and make even more money for those businesses. So that's my take on the UBI. I think it's a bad deal. I think a federal job guarantee is the way to go. I think universal basic services is the way to go. And we already have a basic income today and Social Security. So all we would need to do, if we wanted to have a basic income for various conditions that maybe it doesn't currently support, we could make a modification to Social Security. I say we get rid of FICA altogether, because there's no more regressive tax in the books than FICA. It hurts the poor more than anything. And then I would literally raise the roof on it, get them a cost of living increase baked in. And then I would change the requirements, because already Social Security supports survivor benefits. It supports disability it supports retirement. Now, the idea of saying, hey, I have this condition, or I have this situation that the country, the people, if we do this right, we can make that choice as to what Social Security covers. It doesn't have to just cover the things it covers today. And it doesn't need a FICA increase. Nobody rated the spreadsheet that is the Social Security Trust Fund. It's all new money there too. I don't know if that helps you out with the UBI, but that's my angle on UBI.
Yeah, thanks so much for breaking that down. I want to shout out some of these super chats really quick, and then I have another question for you. Thanks so much, Roger Meadows. Voters already there. Politicians speak about government debt. We're saying, what about our debt? When you choose not to permanently keep above fair market rent. And there's another one here from 86 Blackberry. Thanks so much. Steve did a macro and cheese episode with John Harvey, the cowboy economist, on losing faith in the dollar. Check it out. Thanks so much, 86 Blackberry. And one more from D Nord. Thanks so much for the super chat. The debt ceiling is just a BS game for legislative drama. So, quick question I have about MMT. I believe MMT focuses on macroeconomics, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain to people, because I took microeconomics, but it was a long time ago, Steve, and I don't remember half of it. I'm just going to be honest. I just know we focused a lot on total revenue, um, sales. My professor made up a song about it or something. He was like, when
Let's
the when
sing.
yeah, he did. He made up a song about it. He was like, when the when the prices go up or something, he was like, then the prices hit the floor. He took it from that other song. I forget. But anyway, can you explain to people the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics?
Yeah. So micro is your and I household budget, right? It's investing. It's what is the stock market doing? It's everything after the government spends the money into the economy. The government spending things into the economy, however, is dealing in macros is dealing in aggregates. It's dealing in the whole system as opposed to the individual. And so, as you think about this, a lot of times Richard Wolff, who I know you've had on your show before,
Hmm.
he will talk a lot about economics. But when Richard Wolff talks about economics, he's usually talking in a micro sense. He sometimes strays into macro, which I wish he wouldn't. But he when he's talking in micro, he's spot on. He gets micro very well. And he understands the conditions, the material conditions of the working class, and so I value that. But when it comes to macro, you're talking about like recessions. Recession is not a micro term. Recession is a macro term. You're talking about depression. That's not a micro term. That's a macro term. So in other words, you're looking at the overall economy over a period of time, right?
Okay.
And so I think that most of what we do as individuals, when we think in terms of economics, we're thinking in terms of home ec. We're thinking about our grocery bill, electric bill, things like that. We're thinking about our bank statement. When the government is talking about that, they're not really worried about their income because the government doesn't require an income. Okay. The taxes are just simply a, a tool of coercion, if you will, to require you to need that dollar. That's why I always laugh when people talk about Bitcoin taking it over. The day you can pay your taxes in Bitcoin be the day I take that seriously. Until then, it's a lie, and anyone who says differently is lying. Period. It's not like they could be incorrect. We could be gentle about it, but it's wrong. How about that? It's just wrong. Um, the dollar, the reason why we have a tax is not to fund the programs, but in fact to drive your need for the currency. So if you go way, way back to the time of kings and stuff like that, King would say, "Hey, I want to build a road," and he'd go to a guy that's sitting there picking potatoes in his field, and he's like, "Hey, I want to build a road. Will you come help build my road?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, I'm all right, man. I got it going on over here. I'm picking some potatoes. I'm good. Take the kids out hunting later for food, and maybe we'll go fishing and swimming." Yeah. He goes, "What if I give you this gold coin right here? Would you do it for that? It's got my face on it." He's like, "Yeah, what am I going to do with the gold coin? No, I'm good. I think I'll just keep doing what I'm doing." He's like, "Good point." He goes, okay. He goes, "We're going to take your house from you." The guy goes, "What? Why are you going to take my house from me?" He goes, "Oh, see, I want to build this road, but I need people to build it. And in your case, it's 10 gold coins to keep your house." "Oh, well, how do I get 10 gold coins?" "Oh, see this road over here that I wanted you to build? Yeah, I'll pay you 12 gold coins if you'll build it." "Oh, wow. What do I do with the spare two?" "I don't know. That's for you to think about. Put in the bank somewhere." Right. This is what drives the currency. He didn't need the currency. He didn't need that gold coin before. He only needed it when he imposed the tax. And so when you think about it, the government in the US, talking macro micro here, okay? Government in the US realizes that regular Jane and Joe have to work. Why do they have to work? Because they need things. And how do they, get things? They get things with money in the United States and and around the world. And so people go and they spend whatever currency that individual takes. If you go to Chuck E. Cheese and you want to buy, you want to play a game, you've got to buy Chucky bucks or whatever those little coins are. And
Hmm.
so now you're spending those coins. But guess what? Before you got those coins, you had to buy those coins with your dollar, right? And so it's the same thing in the US. Somebody may say that, hey, you can pay this in Bitcoin, but guess what they transact Bitcoin in? US dollars, right? The government's current unit of account. So ultimately, macro and micro are very, very different from one another. And when people talk about the federal government, they should take everything they think they know about economics from their household budget and forget about it. It doesn't have anything to do with the federal government. Couldn't be different. You and I, we cannot create currency out of thin air. We could, but nobody would take it. Federal government has the power to coerce you to do it because they can send the police, they can send the IRS, they can send whoever. Bottom line is there's a credible threat there that hangs over each of our heads uh, for those taxes. So that's what keeps the currency working. That's at the macro level. But at the micro level, we have to consider taxes as part of our budget. We have to consider property taxes. We have to consider education taxes or gas taxes or whatever other taxes are in play. We have to consider that because that's part of our micro budget. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thanks so much for breaking that down because I'm telling you, I was like, look, I was like, I cannot like go into detail about this stuff. Thanks so much, Roger, for the super chat. What about UBI for new parents to stay at home and bond with child and college students to not have to work so time is not divided between work and studies?
Okay, so let's talk about what both of these two individual things are. Number one, they're not universal. Okay. Number two, neither are unconditional, right? Condition A was new parents stay at home with their kid. Condition B was college students not having to split time. So we have a college student role and we have a parent role. Now, there's absolutely nothing under the sun that would prevent us from providing 6 months of paid family leave to any new parent. There's nothing that would prevent us from doing a year of that.
Mhm.
Okay. There's nothing that's preventing us from providing students with a stipend or any number of things. I mean, they could even provide college, like a college currency, like the uni, which is what they talk about doing at CUNY. The uni is an opportunity for them to build a local currency into the campus structure that could provide food. It could provide any number of things, tickets to the movie theater in the college town, whatever it is that they're doing. And so it's perfectly conceivable that we could write a bill that would provide in those circumstances. And that's kind of also what I said with Social Security. If you think about it, Social Security is a law and it's written the way it's written today. But like any law, it can be amended, it can be changed, it could be added to, it can be taken away from, and we could add different classifications to that as well. I personally would like to see a law passed that provides a right to parents to have however long, so they're not forced to go back into the or force employers to provide remote work solutions or any number of things, flex work, you name it. I'm willing to do anything just about in that space, but don't call it a UBI. It's not a UBI. UBI is a universal or unconditional basic income for all. Okay. And, if you want to say we'll give certain conditions a basic income, certain situations a basic income, I'm all for it. I'm not into means testing. I don't want to hear somebody makes 50,000, so they're not eligible for this. I want to see something where people can opt in, opt out, but there's criteria for it. In the case of a UBI, though, I want to be clear. What you're doing is you're giving them cash. I want to see them have that new parent have health care. I want to see them have, support services, free child care, whatever they need to make their lives better. I'm all for it. I don't believe that the UBI is what we're talking about there, though.
Gotcha. Thanks so much, Natalie, for the super chat. Thanks for having Steve on, Sabby. Hi, Steve.
Hey.
And that brings me into our second story. A lot of you guys have seen this week on the news. It is not a surprise. And many of us predicted that this was going to happen. So a lot of workers are on strike. And it seems like every other day it's another company that I hear about. I want to play this video Now, this was on CBS Mornings. I'm surprised they actually showed this. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm surprised they showed this on CBS Mornings. But I'm going to share my screen because I want to get Steve's opinion too about the worker strikes that are going on in this country. Thousands of workers are on strike across the U.S. this morning, and tens of thousands more could join them as Entertainment Union IATSE members vote to authorize a strike that is set to begin Monday. That is referring to the Hollywood employees, the ones that work behind the scenes. They do production, hair, makeup, all that fun stuff. I talked about that a couple episodes ago. Now I want to play this video. Let me go ahead and make this a little bit larger for you.
IATSE president.
And I'm going to mute my mic so I don't have an echo.
Thousands of workers are on strike this morning across the U.S. That includes more than 10,000 employees at John Deere plants. Around 1,400 Kellogg's employees have been on strike for nearly 2 weeks. And 24,000 Kaiser Permanente healthcare workers have authorized the strike. On Monday, film and TV production across the country could shut down in a work stoppage involving 60,000 crew members. They're demanding safer working conditions. Jonathan Vigliotti has more.
Currently, I work sometimes 80 hours a week.
You say 80 hours a week so casually.
Yeah.
Amy Thurlow is a writer's assistant in Hollywood, a job that makes just over state minimum wage. She's also a member of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, a union with around 60,000 of some of the most essential workers in entertainment, like camera operators and set designers, who could all strike on Monday.
We're talking about people who love their work.
IATSE President Matthew Loeb says his members are asking for better pay and quality of life, like a guarantee of 10 hours between shifts.
A person might go to work in the morning and not get a meal for 9 or 10 hours or a break during the day.
IATSE is not the only union taking action. More than 10,000 United Auto workers at John Deere plants are striking for the first time in 35 years, walking away from a contract that would have provided up to a 6% raise, which workers said was not enough, as company earnings are expected to hit record highs.
Really doing what we've needed to do, standing up for ourselves.
With more than 10 million open jobs across the U.S. and much of the country rebounding from the worst of COVID-19, a more assertive labor force shouldn't come as a surprise, says former Labor Secretary Robert Reich.
At the end of that crisis, workers begin to say, wait a minute, maybe I ought to be doing better. You have this huge surge in pent-up demand. At the same time, you've got a shortage of workers. And a lot of workers know that this is the time, if there's ever a time, to flex their muscles.
For CBS Mornings, I'm Jonathan Vigliotti.
So I want to add to this. It was actually this morning, it was over 100,000 workers altogether are on strike in this country. And if I remember correctly with the Kellogg strike, they're upset about the fact that they have a tiered benefit system, which I don't agree with. I never have. I've been a part of that myself before in the past. And that basically means that like certain employees that came in before a certain time, like a certain year or whatever, they get a set of benefits. And then people who came in after that year, they get a different set of benefits. I think that's ridiculous. I think everybody should have the same benefits, but those things do happen. Steve, I want to get your opinion about the strikes going on across the country. Today's October 15th. Today was the start of the general strike that was going on, the October general strike. Why do you think this is happening? Do you think that this is happening because of the pandemic, or do you think that this was going to happen eventually anyway? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I muted when you put the Nate Burleson show. I mean, I love that guy. But I think of this as a direct result of the pandemic, a direct result of people not getting pandemic relief the people learning that they could live without jobs and finding ways to work together and not being willing to take less. And then you add in those that are working, they're saying, we need more, right?
Mhm.
And so I think the timing of this is very, very tied to COVID. And I think that, we've been in lockdown for, I don't know, let's say 18 months. Even though we're out and about a little bit more now than we were, it's still not quite normal. And I think that this has become a lot of people's normal. Like, this is what they've known. This is the world they know. And they don't have a great deal of track record before this. So coming into the workforce, coming through school, dealing with this in general, I think has put a lot of us, parents, kids, in a real existential, I don't want to call it crisis, but why am I here? What am I doing? What is it
Yep.
that I'm doing even? You know what I
Yep.
mean? And so I think that you see these workers in these various companies, and there's opportunity there to make a difference. There's definitely opportunity. I gotta tell you though, I want to be clear. I want to get super amped about this. All right, I really want to be hyped about it. But the fact is that it's a drop of water in the ocean right now. It's a drop of water in the ocean, and
Why so?
it's not enough of the essential things that we need to bring this. You want to put the longshoremen and the rail workers and transportation workers in general that move product around the world and around the country. If you want to put them on strike, you're going to have a major impact. You talk about truckers not delivering packages, not delivering what, you're going to have a major impact. That's going to have a larger macro statement than some of these more micro things. We're trying to bundle them. We're trying to see this as bigger, and I want it to be. See, I want it to be. But my spidey senses are telling me that it's good to see people fighting back, but it's nowhere near enough.
Mm.
And it's been this way. I look back to the Bernie Sanders, both trips through the primaries, and I think to myself how gutted I felt when I would see so many people filling the streets for Bernie Sanders. And then you see the quote unquote election results, whatever that is, right?
Mhm.
And you realize that at some point in time, there's just not enough. Bottom line is, there's a lot of quiet people that don't go to rallies, that just come home and sit in front of Rachel Maddow. Okay. And that's what they do with their lives. They don't know anything. They don't know that Sabby Sabs or Steve Grumbine exist. They don't care what we have to say. They wouldn't take 5 minutes to watch alternative media. And so they're watching MSM. We see those people that were motivated to get off their couches, out of their seats, get in the streets, go to rallies, do different things. And it's kind of overwhelming to see that many people. But in reality, it's a small amount of people. And it took a lot for me to get that, right? That we've got a lot of work to do. Yes, there is a lot of people out there that feel the way we feel, but they're nowhere near enough that are committed to taking action. There's nowhere near enough that they think it, they believe it, sort of. But at the end of the day, they're not going to risk the biscuit. They're going to stay doing exactly what they've been doing. And, at some point in time, you can't really blame individuals. They're doing the best they can for their families. They're trying to make the best decisions they can. There's no, there might be a million books on it, but at the end of the day, you got to look your family in the eye and tell them what you're doing. And so in my mind, it's just not enough to make a real dent. Now, it's still early. I'm hoping that this general strike takes off, but I understand there is a lot of people out there who are in very precarious situations, who can't afford to take off, to do a strike, no matter how noble the cause might be. And I'm not prepared to call them scabs. I'm not prepared to, to hate on them. I just recognize that neoliberalism has made it very, very hard to participate in democracy in this country. Neoliberalism has made it very impossible almost to partake in activism. And you
Mm.
look at how few people are ever able to do this and how many families are angry at their activists for spending time doing activism. It's because everybody's stretched to the hilt. And so, I think that this strike, while it's noble and I want it to be successful, it's going to take a lot more than that to really, really, really make a dent. And it's going to take shutting down some, roadways that people count on. It's going to take blocking intersections that are extremely inconvenient to people in power. It's going to require doing a lot more than just I'm going to be just fine if John Deere never produces another tractor a day in my life. I'll be just fine. If a lot of these things. So in the sense of them being essential, in terms of them being the thing that's going to bring the right attention, I just don't think there's enough of the essential type people that are going to be in position to do the major kind of direct action that would be required. Again, I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. I don't think I am, though.
Shout out to Delthea Simmons. The power of management is capital. The power of labor is labor. Withdrawal of labor is the greatest threat to capital. Support the power of labor, support the strike. And I want to give a shout out to Roger as well for the super chat. Thank you, Delthea. Ending unemployment bins didn't bring workers back because nearly half in One Hills Harris X poll said because they took early retirement, they ain't coming back. Oh, that's a good point. I want to comment on that for just a second. I had that happen at my job as well. Some people just took early retirement and said, screw this, man. I'm not dealing with this. I'm not putting my health at risk. I'm not putting my family at risk. I'm just going to take my early retirement and I'm going to peace out. I've seen that happen too. So thanks for bringing that up, Roger. That's a good point. I think another thing, shout out C-Dub. Learn MMT and learn how we can move this country forward. Thanks so much for the super chat. I think when I see like all the employees going on strike, and I'm thinking to myself, man, if we can create the level of movement and protest that we had after George Floyd, that was around the world. Imagine if we could do that for labor.
Yeah. I mean, that would be great. I mean, labor, this is one of the hardest things for me to get my arms around, but I hope everybody takes a second to think about what is labor? Who is labor? Okay. And I mean, if you read Marx and you read leftist, literature, you understand the bourgeoisie and the petite bourgeoisie and the proletariat and stuff like that. But in our case, in the United States, I think of workers as anybody that actually has to receive a paycheck. Anybody that is actually doing labor. There's a very, very small amount of people that are at the top of the food chain that don't do that. And when you think about the numbers, if we stop getting pissed off at people that make 200,000 a year and start focusing on the guy that's got 36 billion, okay? I mean, 200,000 sounds like a lot because it's more than you've got, or you, right? But it's not a lot in terms of dividing up labor. This is one of those areas where we've allowed the management and labor at the office to kind of blur the view of what a worker is and what capital is, right? These guys, your manager, they go home the same way we go, whatever. Your director, same thing. We're not talking about the wealthy of the wealthy here. We're talking about labor. And if we can somehow or another not alienate that next level of labor, we really might be able to make a labor movement in this country happen. I mean, all the laws in the world have been stacked against labor for trying to organize, for trying to do strikes, you name it. So ultimately, I think us finding a way to build that larger labor movement instead of just thinking about it as a management and labor, right? I think that right there could really, truly be transformational. I mean, it's just huge opportunity there for major push. And I think that would also help us in terms of both, because you need mutual aid to do any of the stuff really
Mhm.
well. You really do. You got to have it set up, and you can't have it set up after the fact. I mean, if you've ever been on strike before, if you've ever been on strike, you know that once the union says, okay, guys, we're on strike, you know that you're going to be walking the picket line, and you know that somebody's going to cross that picket line as a scab. And you know that the union is going to give you a certain amount of union pay. Maybe it's going to be pretty freaking low. It's not going to be enough to pay your bills. Most people didn't have enough money to set aside to wait for the next strike to absorb it.
Mhm.
So they have to go out and get jobs. They have to go out and get part-time jobs, delivering pizzas, doing whatever. And I think to myself, imagine if we had a large enough base of what is constituting labor to support each other so that we didn't have to do that, so we could all literally be on the line, so we could be in the streets, and we could literally take that direct action. If we could somehow or another build that framework instead of just focusing downward, which I understand why we do, but if we started looking above around us and redefine what we consider labor, I think that's the ticket. I think that is going to really radically change our chances.
So for some of us, I like for me working in higher ed, I've seen some of these university presidents make a great amount of money. I'm talking some of them are making millions of dollars a year. And when you're a university president, the university pays for your house. So you don't even have to pay a mortgage. And so if I see that, if I see a university president making $2 million a year and I'm working there and the university is paying for their house and the staff at the university are making just enough to get by, how do you convince that person who sits way up at the top, who rarely shows their face to the people below them? How do you convince them to join like a labor movement? Because I think that's some of the problems that some of us are running into.
Yeah, I don't know that I would call that labor. The idea here really is just expanding the pool of who is labor and who is not, is really what I was trying to get to there. But yeah, they're in a power structure. They are decidedly on the opposite end of that. They are not on team us. If you think about that, just in and of itself, the board of governors or the board of whatever for that school and university should be held to account too. If you really want to attack that stuff, attack their board. You know what I mean? Attack them for allowing this to happen, for allowing them to do that, like drag them through the mud. And that will bring, but see, that right there is a policy decision, right? And it's not being done by the government, it's being done by the university. And the university, unless it's a state-based university, if it's a private institution, they got private rules, private funding, whatever. But ultimately, I think that there is a real value in defining a top. No, I don't want to call it a maximum income per se, but really like a cap on what the difference between the mean of the payments to the rest of the workers have and what that guy at the top has. There shouldn't be that gap. There should be a percentage or something that maxes out, that no matter what, if you want to get more money, then you got to raise the bottom. You can't make money if you don't pay them too. And I think that would be, in my opinion, a great way of fixing that. I don't know that I would call them, fellow traveler in the labor movement, but I would, but you know what though? It wouldn't shock me if there is somebody out there who fits that role though. I mean, I'm not a big fan of that guy, Price, the guy that the long-haired CEO that everybody keeps putting his damn Price or whatever. Yeah, I'm not like a hugest fan of his in the world, because I think it's still elevating the rich, trying to, oh, what a great guy he is. Look at a wonderful guy he is for doing this, right? But in reality, what he's doing is just different than the other greedy SOBs. It's what should be done, right? It's like, if you have a conscience, what do you do? Right. And to me, I think that we deify wealth too much in this country. He is isn't he just dreamy? He gave them all the stuff. I'm not going to worship the man. He did a good thing, but that's the bare minimum of entryway, right? That's the right thing to do. So good job, man. But I'm back over here focused on the people that aren't doing it right. Right.
Mm.
I just look at this like we have allies out there. And even if they don't appear like we do, even if they don't struggle like we do, they are out there. And even if we only get a little bit of their support for little things, the more help we have, the more support we have, I think the better we're going to be. And I think the other big thing that jumps out at me on this, and keep me honest here. I want to hear what your thoughts are on this, okay?
Uh-oh.
I think that when we try to find an enemy, when we try to, point it, that's the enemy, we forget it's the system. And I'm guilty of this all the time, right? I had this huge talk with one of my peers who said, Steve, I always look at the system. You always look at the individual. You get mad at people for doing things and stuff like that. I said, yeah, I do, and I just thought to myself, it's the system, isn't it? Right? The system, like if somebody offered you $2 million, would you take it? I would. I got to tell you, I would. I wouldn't turn it away. Right?
It would help debt.
Yeah, it sure
Student
would.
loans, student loans. That's the
so I think to myself, these people that get these, do I hate them for it? No. Would I take it? Yes. Would I fight for more if I had? Yes. But what I do with that money and stuff like that is on me. I'm looking at the system itself that created this absolute shit show of inequality. And I think that, the individuals take what's there, right? If you had easy money to make, I'm not telling you would do this, because there's people that would have higher morals or higher standards. But I think a lot of people would try to get over on the system because it's there to be gotten over on, right? I don't think so you got to change the system. Otherwise, the people will take what's available to them. I really do sadly believe that a lot of people are so desperate, and they've kept us this way. This is neoliberalism's ploy. It makes you feel desperate. It makes you feel insane, crazy, that there's some scarcity. You're going to be playing musical chairs, and you're always going to be the one without a chair. And this is what's always in your head. And so it makes you behave very differently than you would if you didn't think that food was scarce, if you didn't think that, having a roof over your head and a thunderstorm was scarce, if you weren't worried about losing, whatever, your health insurance. All these things play into how we operate with each other. And it's like you see a lot of ADOS folks, for example, that are cast as anti-immigrant. And I was just on with Reset Race the other day talking about reparations. And one of the things that came out was, hey, look, when immigrants come to the US, they take African-American jobs. And these are scarce jobs, and they take them. And so my answer to that was, well, what if we had a federal job guarantee that we could provide jobs to anyone that wanted one at a living wage with benefits? And to me, a lot of this discussion here is usually around a false scarcity narrative that we've painted. And that's why we keep fighting each other. And that's why we keep looking at, different rich guy has 200,000 or 2 million, even 2 million. We should all be so lucky, right? I don't blame the individual when I think about it. I really blame the system. I get angry at the individual for not resisting or doing whatever, but it's the system really at the end of the day that is to blame. And you can't change the system without large numbers. And we don't have them without growing that base of what we consider to be a worker and labor in this country. So that's the long way around to my answer on that, because I really do believe that without having that numbers, we can't do anything.
That's a good point. We were just talking about, we're doing like generational panel series over at FHL, and we did the millennials panel last Friday. And we were just talking about what happened in 2008 with the housing crisis. And some of us were just graduating college, or probably 2 years or so before that, just graduating, basically entering into this economic mess or disaster, I should say, because that's what it felt like at that time. And I remember before that, not having that fear that I would lose what I had. And it was after 2008, I had like this need to feel like I had to hold on to whatever I had, because if something like that happened again, I could lose it all and I would have to
Yep.
start all over. So we were talking about like how as millennials, how we felt like we had to fight harder, we had to struggle harder just to get like entry level jobs, to be paid less, the student loan debt. And so I think you're right when you mentioned that like there's that fear factor in a sense that like this is mine. I gotta have it. I have to hold on to this job. I have to hold on to this because if I don't, then someone's gonna come and take it.
Yeah.
And I'm just realizing for me, I think that that happened after '08, after the whole housing crisis and the gas prices soared and it was hard to find a job. It was a really tough time to be a young adult, especially those of us like graduating from college, thinking that we're going to get like this great job because we
Mhm.
have a degree, only to find out that we're still going to have to struggle. So, was going to college the right thing to do? I want to give a shout out to C Dub. FJG makes strikes easier. Thanks so much. But I just you made me think about something that it's true. They implement like this certain type of fear in all of us. Every group, people on the left, people on the right, black people, white people, every
Yep.
group.
You make very different decisions when you're scared, don't you?
Hmm.
Yep. 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 It's this scarcity narrative, the false scarcity narrative that drives every one of our behaviors. It's the want that creates the problems. We want things. We'd like things to be a certain way. And when they're not that way, it creates problems. It creates dissonance with what we wanted and what we got, right? And sometimes we can live with it, sometimes we can't. And back in 2008, I got my Master of Science in Technology. And in 2007, I got my Master of Science. 2008, I got an MBA. And 2009, I got my packing papers from Verizon after 17 years. And I was given the early out package, which was garbage. And I have been living in extreme precarity since 2009. I have $128,000 in student debt. I have a house payment. I have child support. I have all sorts of stuff. And because it's impossible to find full-time permanent work in the career field that I do anymore, I'm constantly a contractor, which
Mm,
means that I'm the buffer between laying off the full-time workers. If there's somebody that's a contractor, you bring them in because you know that you don't have to explain why you're getting rid of them.
right.
In Pennsylvania, we're a sad right to work state. Okay. There is no protections really at all. So largely being a contractor isn't much different than being an actual employee. But I think back to myself and I had crawled on my floor, peeked up, looked out the slats in my window as the guys were knocking on the door to foreclose on me during that time. And you talk about terrified. My teeth were starting to rot out of my mouth. My grass was 6 feet tall. Okay. Couldn't cut my own grass. I had a car that I had because I had been in sales. It was a BMW 3 Series. Now, before you laugh, it was a used one. It's 10 years old. So anybody that's ever bought one of these old, things knows that they just bought a $30,000 vehicle because it's going to require tons of repairs constantly. People get rid of Beamers when they're ready to start giving up the ghost. And so I had a BMW 330i that did not have reverse. So I had to coast through every parking spot in order to park my car. I drove this car without reverse. No joke. And so I had a house with grass that was 6 feet tall. All my trash, because I couldn't afford trash service, was piled up in a burn pile. That included cans, included whatever, all these trash bags out there. And I had the township coming complaining about my situation. It was horrible. So I lived this precarity for years. I had huge child support at the time. I was constantly going in front of a judge. It was the worst of times. This whole 2009 on created so many problems. And then I almost lost my home. I went through the HAMP program only to find out all the stuff that we do in the new Untouchables, all the elite control fraud that led to the collapse. You name it. I mean, there is so much to be said for that time. I mean, right now, if anything, we should all be getting behind. It's a new Pecora hearing. Ferdinand Pecora was the guy that took it to Wall Street back during the Depression that brought about the creation of Glass-Steagall in 1933. I think it was the trying to think. They created all kinds of stuff during the 1930s to combat what Wall Street had done, and ultimately, we need to do the same thing, because that same exact model, that casino capitalism with Wall Street, is happening even worse now. You notice housing values have gone through the roof. This is all, well, I shouldn't say it's all. Part of it is because of the pandemic. They stopped building houses. They stopped cutting trees down. They stopped doing. So now there's a scarcity on certain houses and the prices went up. Okay.
Yep.
Number two is the fact that states are revenue constrained, right? And so what do states do to fix their revenue problems? They either raise taxes or they do a number of other things. And one of the things that we found is that a lot of states would start helping support appraisals to be elevated because they get their tax base off of the higher increase in property value. And so all of this stuff is going on to create this condition where houses are going through the roof. People are making money again. Okay. These momentary things where, oh, it's such a good thing. But then all of a sudden, as soon as the market levels out, those prices are going to crash and people are going to have purchased homes at an inflated value that will now be upside down because the market collapsed again like it did in 08 and 09. We're looking at something similar to that happening again here. And one of the only things that I'm not really sure how this will impact it is all the hedge funds and stuff that have been purchasing properties around the country, like BlackRock, all these, capital groups buying up properties, trying to turn us into a renter nation. The question becomes, what does their purchase of all that property do to serving as a bit of an anchor for the housing market? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's something I keep thinking about, because they're not going to want to see their investment tank. So the question then becomes, how do we avoid tanking as people? And I think the only way to do that for all these issues that we've talked about tonight really is to eliminate corruption and have a new Pecora hearing and get a mass movement to purge corruption. I think it's a really, really important thing. And I think we can all, Republicans and Democrats and independents, should be able to all get behind eliminating corruption. And I think that that's a good place to start. That's how you address that dean or whatever at the college. That's, there's a lot of corruption here, and I think it starts getting us to be aware of the economics that allow for it to occur.
So that brings me to my last question for you, which involves like the two-party system. I know last time you were on, you said you used to be like on the right, like back in the day.
Way long. Yeah.
What advice would you give to leftists in reference to talking to people on the right? Like, what are things that we may be doing that is not a good idea to try to, like, I don't want to say pull them over to the side, but you know what I mean, to try to get them to understand like the issues that we're talking about and we advocate for. What are we doing wrong and what is the right way of doing that?
Right. That's a great question. I'll tell you a quick story. A person who most people would say, what the hell are you doing friends with this person? Right. They're a bigot. They're a racist. There was a guy named Rudy. I won't go into his last name. He's dead. But he was loved by all. Like everybody in this community loved him. I have never seen so many kids celebrate his life, saying they've never had a better mentor. He always cared for him. He would drive to the ends of the world to help them, etc. But make no mistake about it. This guy was a raging racist. He was a homophobe. He was all the things that none of us would normally stand behind. Okay. And you think there's a huge part of our society that mama and daddy passed that thinking on to them, the generational curse. And so in right-wing circles, they have different media. They have different, the Trump version of the world is really hard for me to get my head wrapped around, because I understand the quote unquote Republican view. This feels a lot more like the anarcho-capitalist view, the nihilist view of things, right? Overly cynical, overly suspicious, overly before you even had a chance to think about it, reactionary. And so when I think about the guy Rudy, I think to myself, if I told all those people, what are you celebrating this guy for? He's a freaking racist, right? They'd say, but when my kid broke his leg, he was the one there patching him up in the desert. I would have known, this is a guy who did great things. He just was a flaming racist piece of whatever, right? So the right doesn't see all this racist stuff. They just see that he shows up to church and sets up the tables. He, goes over to the old lady down the street and cuts her grass. He sees that he always, takes care of his wife or whatever. They don't see the rest of it. So when we talk about things in always never statements, they're like, well, they're talking about, they do it, right? They do it.
I was going to say.
They do it, right? But you said, what are we doing that is making a mistake? Well, the thing is that every right winger is not going to put a white cloak on. They're not going to put a pointy cap on. That's not what they are all about. A lot of them feel the same way most of us do. They don't want to see unfair things happen. They don't want to see corruption rewarded. They don't want to see people getting over on the system, right? They think the system was God-breathed, and they want to defend the Constitution and stuff. So in their mind, they're doing the right thing, right? So if you start off with understanding where they're at, then you could talk to them about things with an understanding of where they're coming from, right? It's this way with every group that's not your own group. Whenever you're with a different group and you're trying to figure out how to talk, you got to kind of figure out who they are and what matters to them, right? And not make assumptions about what matters to them. And I got to be honest with you. When I have conversations with right-wing people mano a mano, a lot of times they get the things I'm talking about really quickly. They do have a lot of buts in there. But I really do believe that one-on-one conversations are really good if you come in prepared, with a heart prepared to try to help change that individual's mindset, or at least present them with a different viewpoint. Okay. But I think there's a lot of things that we do agree on. It's just when you're watching Fox News and all you're hearing about is how bad Joe Biden is, and when you're watching CNN and C-SPAN, all you hear about even 2 years later is Donald Trump, it's kind of hard to blame them for what they're getting plied with constantly. It takes real effort to disengage, no matter how cool we all feel we are, because we've disengaged. There was a process of disengagement from not sucking into the mainstream and realizing things are wrong, having that epiphany, and then taking a different step. I just think of it like this. There's a line in a song by a band named Alter Bridge that talks about now is not forever. And I think about that all the time. When I'm at my lowest points and I'm having dark thoughts, I'm like, wait till tomorrow to do it, dude. If you want to do it tomorrow, do it tomorrow. But today, you're good. And usually after I get past the upset stomach or the indigestion, I feel better the next day. Doesn't always work that way, but a lot of times it does. And so I think to myself, don't just do rash things. Don't just knee jerk it. And when you look at right wingers, they do knee jerk. They have a built-in, they're reactionary by, it's kind of their proclivity is towards fear to begin with. They fear things that are different than them. And that's kind of a common trait. And so if you go into it understanding you're dealing with an individual who maybe wants a lot of the same things you want, they just don't realize that they want it because they've never heard about it, or they've never thought about it in your way. If you talk to them as people, sometimes you win, And really, at the end of the day, I mean, we're all just individuals. If we can somehow or another be a force multiplier and even shed some light to 2 or 3 right wingers in our entire life, we force multiplied ourselves. So I think there's a real opportunity there to educate people, educate in a way that it's not condescending, and educate in a way that sees them as a person. That's the one-on-one. I understand that everybody doesn't have time for that, and everybody's not built for that. But I do believe that a lot of why they feel the way they feel is direct programming from mainstream media, from church, and from their parents and from the local community. So you're not just going to win the war on logic. Logic will not win a war of the heart. The heart has been conditioned to love coal mining, or it's been conditioned to love this. My daddy taught me how to deer hunt, and I deer hunt, and that's the way we do it. We know what deer is. It's black powder month. It's this. It's that. You just got to understand that these are the things that are valuable to them, and if you can work within that space, you got a shot. It's hard to say how to talk to them other than to say each person's an individual. You can look at them in a macro way and say that I see overall this is the way it is, but I don't want to assume you're one of the bad people, if you will. Give people a chance. Give them a chance to voice what they have to say, listen to them, and kind of take the Bible answer man and say, always have an answer for the hope that lies within, and be ready to answer them. I mean, just that's where theory kicks in for us as lefties. That's why we must read history. That's why we must go down the rabbit hole of learning Lenin and learning Marx and learning Engels and going through all the past, because if we don't have a good framework for it, all we're left is with emotionalism. And I think that it's very important to divorce ourselves from emotionalism when dealing with people of alternate beliefs and alternate, histories and lifestyles.
Man, well said, Steve. I have a lot of emotionalism, I can tell you.
I do too. Trust me. Just ask around.
I want to give shout out to Roger. Roger, thanks so much for the super chat. To raise revenue, states can charter public banks. Thanks so much for that, Roger. That's been coming up more and more lately. And also, I want to give a thank you to, here you are, VA from New York, Virginia from New York. Racism is a vital tool to keep the working class divided. That is 100% true. Thanks so much. That's why I always say one of the ways that we can all come together is through labor, because that's something I think just about everybody at some point has had we have in common with. We've had to deal with labor. Like,
you got it.
Got to start with something. But
Yeah,
Steve, thanks so
absolutely.
much. Thanks so much for coming on. I knew it. I was like, you guys don't even know, because like this morning when I heard that thing about the debt ceiling, I was like, oh my God, I want to talk about this tonight and how it relates to MMT, but I can't go into detail like Steve.
Yeah, it's funny. I want to say this for the record. I know more things than MMT, right? You can hear, I like talking about socialism. I like talking about theory. I like talking, but I do recognize the value of knowing economics, because whenever you look at the progressive movement, it's the one thing that no one wants to talk about. And so when you're trying to figure out what's wrong, how do we make this right? Okay. I'm going to say something, and this is probably, I know you were probably trying to find a graceful way to end this, but I want to say this real quick because I think it's important. When you look at people in general and how they view what's important, right? They stay away from things that they're not comfortable with. They stay away from things that they don't understand, or maybe they ham-handedly put their foot in the mud, if you will, step in the dog shit when they don't know what they're talking about, but they feel compelled to talk about something, right? I think that as a movement, we should be students, because there is no real energy right now for a revolution. Okay, there isn't. As much as we want one, you can't force a revolution to occur. If you look at the arc of history and you look at the arc of all these revolutions, they take time. Haitian Revolution took time, took 50 years to generate before they finally got to Dessalines. Okay. Mackendal was the one that started it in 1750s or something to that effect. You look at each of these steps. Our revolution didn't just happen, you know? It took time. It took a lot of material conditions to come to be, to where the contradictions of the existing system and the pain and suffering of the people got so high and so loud that there was no choice but for revolution. We're not at that point, even though we may feel it. We're not. We're nowhere near it. And most people are very comfortable. And so us as individuals, the best thing we can do is learn, take the time to study these things that are boring, that maybe are not as riveting, and really start developing an analysis that we can pass on to others, and sharpen it with each other, man. Talk about it. Find out what other people believe. Find out good resources and work together to educate and become a weapon of knowledge, right? I think that is the way forward. I think that's the only way forward. Otherwise, we keep doing the same stuff. This politician failed us. This person failed us. This thing failed us. And I'll be honest with you. I flip through YouTube, and when I see people doing oh, they're so bad, they failed, the fraud, this, I keep scrolling, because I've already read that book. I've read the sequel. I got the box of cereal. I got the action figure. I'm done. I don't want to hear it anymore. I want us to get smart and really, really be soldiers in a war that we haven't started yet, right? To be an army of citizens that want better. And if we start behaving like we're at war, we're going to start doing things differently. And that may sound a little bit, ratcheted up, but I'm telling you right now that we are soldiers. Even if we're not shooting bullets, our warfare is a different form of warfare. And I hope that people take the time to learn the MMT stuff, because when the debt ceiling comes up, that's warfare. When they start cutting food stamps, that's warfare. When they reduce unemployment, that's warfare. That's violence. And it's up to us to check that violence. And the only way to check that violence is with knowledge. Because if you haven't invested yourself to learn this stuff, you'll say any sort of thing. And the people that are pulling the strings are laughing at you. They're laughing at you. It's up to us to educate each other, each one teach one, and become students of political theory, and become activists in more than theory, but in deed. And so there's my sign-off pitch.
Man, Steve, that was like you really wow. Yeah. I'm telling you, this is the second time Steve came on. The first time Steve came on, I was like, oh my God, I just learned so much. Very educational.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I love being on. It's great. It was very flattering for you to reach out to me. So I really do appreciate it.
Thanks so much for coming on. All right, guys. You know how we do this. I won't be here on the weekend. That's time for Sabby. But I'll be back on Monday, and Shahid Buttar is going to be here. We're going to talk about some of his activism and what's coming up in San Francisco. I think that's really important. I want you guys to hear about that. So you know how we do this, guys. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.
See you later.